Through the Desert by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Did you like it? Subscribe and recommend to friends. Chapter 44. The expedition of Captain Glenn and Dr. Clary certainly was not organized to seek Staś and Nell. It was a large and well-equipped government expedition, sent out to explore the northeast slopes of the giant mountain Kilimanjaro, and also the but little-known large tracts to the north of this mountain. It is true that the captain and the doctor knew about the kidnapping of the children from Medinet el-Fayum, for English and Arabic newspapers had published accounts of it, but they thought that both had died or else were languishing as prisoners of the Mahdi, from whom not a single European captive had regained his freedom. Clary, whose sister was married to Rawlison of Bombay, and who on his trip to Cairo had been quite taken with little Nell, missed her very much. But they were also very sorry for the brave boy. They had sent several telegrams from Mombasa to Mr. Rawlison, asking whether the children had been found, and only after the last unfavorable answer, which arrived some time before the departure of the caravan, did they finally give up every hope of finding them. It never even occurred to them that the children who were kidnapped in distant Khartoum might turn up in this district. But in the evenings, after the day's work was over, they often conversed about them, for the doctor could not forget the beautiful little girl. Meanwhile, the caravan advanced still farther. After staying quite some time on the eastern slopes of Kilimanjaro and exploring the upper course of the rivers Sabaki and Tana, as well as the Kenya Mountains, the captain and the doctor turned off northward, and after having crossed the swampy Guaso Nidro, came into a wide, uninhabited plain, over which roamed only innumerable herds of antelope. After a journey of more than 3 months, the people needed a longer rest, and so Captain Glenn, after having come to a fairly large lake containing plenty of brown but healthy water, ordered the tents to be erected on its banks for a 10 days' halt. During the preparations for camping, the white people busied themselves with hunting and sorting their geographical and natural science notes, and the Negroes fell into their well-beloved idleness. It happened one day that Dr. Clary, rising early and approaching the shore, saw several Zanzibar Negroes belonging to the caravan with their faces upturned looking at the top of a tall tree and repeating over and over again, "Ndege? Akuna ndege. Ndege? A bird. No bird. A bird." The doctor was short-sighted, so he sent to the tent for a telescope. Then he looked through it at the object to which the Negroes pointed, and great surprise showed on his face. "Call the captain here," he said. Before the Negroes had reached him, the captain appeared outside the tent. He was about to start on an antelope hunt. "Glenn, look!" cried the doctor, pointing upward. The captain raised his head, covered his eyes with his hands, and showed as much surprise as did the doctor. "A kite!" he cried. "Yes, but Negroes don't send up kites. Where can it come from? There may be a settlement of white people or a mission in the neighborhood. This is the 3rd day the wind has blown from the west, over a region as unknown and perhaps as uninhabited as is this jungle. Besides, you know that there are no settlements or missions hereabouts. Indeed, it is very strange and interesting. We must certainly take down the kite. Yes, perhaps then we shall find out where it came from." The captain gave a short order. The tree was several feet high, but in a moment the Negroes had reached the top, carefully unfastened the kite, taken it down, and handed it to the doctor, who examined it quickly and said, "There's writing on it. Let us look." And in order to see better, he half closed his eyes and began to read. Suddenly his face changed and his hand trembled. "Glenn," he said, "take that, read it through, and convince me that I have not had a sunstroke, and that I am still in my right senses." The captain took the bamboo frame to which the sheet of paper was attached, and read the following. "Nell Rawlison and Staś Tarkowski, who were sent from Khartoum to Fashoda, and were transported from Fashoda to the east of the Nile, have freed themselves from the hands of the dervishes. After a journey of many months, they have arrived at a lake which lies to the south of Abyssinia. They are going to the ocean. They beg for help." And on the other side of the sheet was found the following postscript. "This, the 55th kite, was sent up from a group of mountains which surrounds a lake not mentioned in geography. Whosoever finds it should send the news to the Canal Administration in Port Said or to Captain Glenn in Mombasa." Staś Tarkowski. When the captain's voice had ceased, the two friends silently regarded each other. "What does it mean?" at last asked Dr. Clary. "I can't believe my eyes," answered the captain. "But is there no mistake?" "No. There it is, plainly written, Nell Rawlison and Staś Tarkowski. There it is, as plain as can be, and perhaps they may be in this vicinity? So God has apparently saved them. All thanks be to him," cried the doctor enthusiastically. "But in what direction shall we look for them? Is there nothing more on the kite?" There were several other words, but on a part torn by the branches, it is hard to read them. Both leaned their heads over the paper, and only after a lengthy examination were they able to spell, "The rainy season has long since passed." "What does that mean?" asked the doctor. "That the boy has lost his reckoning of time." And in this way he tried to give the date as best he could. "You are right. So this kite cannot have been sent up such a very long while ago. If that is the case, then they cannot be very far off by this time." This feverish, abrupt conversation lasted a little longer. Then they both began to inspect the document again and to consider every word written on it. But it all seemed so improbable that had it not come from a place where not even one European could be found, more than 600 kilometers distant from the nearest coast, the doctor and the captain would have been inclined to think it a joke played by European or mission children after having read in the newspapers about the kidnapping. Still, it was hard for them not to believe their eyes, for they had the kite in their hands, and the inscription, being scarcely blurred at all, was quite distinct. Notwithstanding, there were many things about it that they could not understand. Where could the children have procured the paper for the kites? If they had obtained it from a caravan, they would have joined the caravan, and so would not have been obliged to ask for assistance. Why had the boy not tried to escape to Abyssinia with his little companion? Why had the dervishes sent them to the east of the Nile in an unknown country? How had they been able to escape from the dervishes? Where were they hiding? By what miracle had they not starved to death during this journey of many months? By what miracle had they not become the prey of wild beasts? Why had the savages not killed them? To all these questions they could find no answers. "I can't understand it. I can't understand it," repeated Dr. Clary. "It surely is a miracle of God's working." "It would seem so," answered the captain. Then he added, "But there's a fine boy for you. This must be his work," and he did not leave the little one in the lurch. God bless his head and his heart. Stanley, yes, even Stanley, placed as he was, could not have kept up over 3 days. And they are still alive. But they beg for help. What's past is past. We must depart immediately. And so they set out. On the way, the two friends continually re-examined the document, trusting that they might find directions on it to guide them in going to the children's assistance. But no such directions were found. The captain led the caravan in a zigzag path, hoping he might find some trace of them, the remains of some campfire or a tree with marks cut into the bark. In this way they traveled on for several days, when unfortunately they found themselves on a treeless plain, covered with tall heather and tufts of dried grass. The two travelers were now very much alarmed. How easy, they thought, was it to miss even a large caravan on these vast prairies, and how much easier it was to miss 2 children, who, as they supposed, were creeping along somewhere in the tall heather like 2 little worms. Another day passed. Neither the tin cans with notes inside them which they left behind them tied to bushes, nor the watchfires burning during the night were of any avail. The captain and the doctor from time to time began to lose hope of ever finding the children. Indeed, they felt quite sure they were no longer alive. Nevertheless, they continued searching diligently for several days. At last, the scouts whom Glenn sent out to reconnoiter brought news that in front of them lay an absolutely arid desert. So when they accidentally came across water in a hollow of the ground, they were obliged to halt to make provision for the coming journey. The hollow was several feet deep and very narrow. At its bottom a hot spring bubbled and boiled, for it was saturated with carbonic gas. The water, when cooled, proved to be good and wholesome. There was so much water in the spring that 30 men of their caravan were unable to empty it. On the contrary, the more water they dipped out, the higher it spurted forth. Perhaps in time said Dr. Clary. "Invalids will come here to be cured by this water, but at present the steep side of the cliff renders it inaccessible even to animals. Can it be possible that the children have found a similar spring? I don't know. Perhaps there are more like these in this part of the country. If not, the children will surely die of thirst." The night approached. They lighted several fires, but no boma was erected, for they could find no materials with which to build it. After supper, the doctor and the captain sat down on camp stools, lighted their pipes, and began to converse on the subject that weighed most heavily on their hearts. "Not the least trace," Clary began. "It had occurred to me," answered Glenn, "to send 10 of our people to the coast with a telegram stating that news from the children had been received. But I am glad that I did not send it, for the messengers would most likely have given out on the way, and even if they had reached their destination, what good would it do to raise false hopes and increase their grief?" The doctor removed his white helmet and wiped his perspiring forehead. "Listen," said he. "Suppose we were to return to that lake and have niches cut in the bark of the trees and large fires burning by night. Perhaps the children would see these signs. If they are in the neighborhood, we would not need to take these means to find them, and if they are far away, the rise in the ground would hide the fires. This plateau only appears to be level. In reality, it is covered with ridges and waves like the ocean. Besides, if we were to retrace our steps, we would lose all hope of finding a vestige of them." "Speak plainly. You have lost all hope." "My friend, we are grown strong, experienced men. Just imagine what would have become of us if we had been stranded here by ourselves, even if supplied with water, had we no provisions or men. Yes, unfortunately, yes, I can picture to myself 2 children traveling through the desert on a night like this. Hunger, thirst, and wild animals, and yet the boy writes that they have dragged through long months in this way. I cannot possibly imagine it. For a long time, all that disturbed the silence of the night was the crackling of the tobacco in their pipes. The doctor stared into the pale depth of the night, and then in a suppressed voice said, "It is now late, but I cannot sleep. And to think that, if they are still alive, perhaps they are wandering around here somewhere in the moonlight between these dried tufts of heather, alone, such young children. Glenn, do you remember the angel face of the little one? I remember it perfectly and shall not forget it. Ah, I would gladly have my hand cut off if—" He did not finish the sentence, for Captain Glenn jumped up as suddenly as if scalding water had been poured over him. "A rocket in the distance," he cried. "A rocket! A rocket!" repeated the doctor. "There must be a caravan ahead of us. Perhaps it has come across the children. Perhaps. Let us make haste to meet them. Forward." The captain's orders were at once heard throughout the camp. The Zanzibar Negroes sprang to their feet. Torches were lighted, and in answer to the distant signals, Glenn ordered rockets sent up in rapid succession and shots to be fired. In less than a quarter of an hour, the entire camp was on its way. From a distance were heard shots responding to theirs. There was no longer any doubt but that some European caravan was for some unknown reason asking for help. The captain and the doctor ran as fast as they possibly could, alternately hoping and fearing. Would they find the children or not? The doctor said to himself that if they did not find them, they could at least search for their bodies in the dreadful heather fields. Half an hour later, one of those ridges of which they had spoken shut off the view from the 2 friends. But they were now so near that they distinctly heard the tramping of horses. A few minutes more, and a rider appeared on the top of a hillock. He held a large white object in front of him on the saddle. "Hold the torches high," commanded Glenn. At the same moment, the rider brought his horse to a standstill within the circle of lights. "Water! Water!" "The children!" cried Dr. Clary. Illustration. "Water! Water!" repeated. "The children!" cried Dr. Clary. "Water!" repeated Stash. And he almost threw Nell into the arms of the captain, and then he sprang out of the saddle. The next moment he staggered to the ground as if lifeless. The rejoicing of the rescuers was boundless, but the credulity of the 2 Englishmen was put to a severe test. As they had been unable to comprehend how the children by themselves had been able to travel over the measureless tracts of land and the deserts which separated their present position from the Nile and Fashoda, Neither could they conjecture how the young Pole, as they called Staś, could have done it, and how it was that he appeared before them as the leader of a large caravan, armed with European weapons, with an elephant who carried a palanquin, with horses, tents, and a considerable amount of provisions. At this astounding sight, the captain stretched out his hands, saying over and over again, "Clary, I have seen a great deal in my life, but never a boy like this." And the good doctor, equally astonished, said, "And he released the little one from captivity, and saved her." After having made this remark, he ran to the tents to see how the children were, and if they were sleeping comfortably. After they had had food and drink, the children were undressed and put to bed, and slept during the whole of the following day, as soundly as if they were dead, and so did the men belonging to their caravan. Captain Glenn attempted to question Kali about their adventures and about Staś's part in them, but the young Negro merely opened one eye and answered, "The great man can do everything," and went to sleep again. So they were obliged to put off their questions until the following day. Meanwhile, the two friends consulted with each other as to the journey back to Mombasa. They had already traveled farther and explored larger tracts than their commission called for, and so they decided to return at once. The unknown lake had a great fascination for the captain, but the welfare of the children and the desire to take them back to their grief-stricken fathers as soon as possible turned the scales. The doctor insisted that at present they should take a good rest on the cool summits of the Kenya or Kilimanjaro mountains. They also decided not to send word to the children's fathers until they reached the mountains, and then tell them to come to Mombasa. On the third day, after they were well rested and had bathed several times, they started on their return journey. Now they were obliged to part from Kali. Staś convinced the little one that it would be selfish for her to take him with them to the ocean, or even as far as Egypt, for even in England, Kali would be nothing more than a servant, while if he were to rule over his people, he could, as king, spread the Christian religion and ameliorate the savage customs of the Wahimas, and not only civilize them, but make them good. He also expressed similar sentiments to Kali. Many tears were shed at parting. Staś was not ashamed to weep, for had not he and Nell been through much happiness and misery in common with Kali? And not only had they both learned to appreciate his kind heart, but they had also grown very fond of him. The young Negro lay a long time at the feet of his Bwana Kubwa and of the good Msimu. He turned back twice to look at them, but at last the moment of parting had come, and the two caravans separated, going in opposite directions. It was only after they were under way that the adventures of the two little travelers were told. Staś, who used to be so fond of boasting, did not sound his own praises at all now, for he had accomplished so many things and gone through so much that he had developed sufficiently to recognize that facts speak louder than words, that deeds alone, even when told as modestly as possible, speak for themselves. Daily, during the hot, white hours and evenings in the bivouac, the events and adventures which the children had suffered passed before the eyes of the captain and the doctor like moving pictures. In this way they saw them carried off from Medinet el Fayum, and the terrible journey on camels through the desert, Khartoum and Omdurman, which was a hell on earth, and the designing Mahdi. When Staś told how he had replied to the Mahdi when the latter wanted him to change his religion, the two friends arose, and each of them in turn grasped Staś's right hand firmly. Then the captain said, "The Mahdi is not living now." The Mahdi not lived surprised. "That's true," the doctor continued. "He was suffocated in his own fat, or, properly speaking, he died of fatty degeneration of the heart, and Abdullah has taken command." A long pause ensued. "Ha!" said Staś. "When he sent us to meet our death in Fashoda, he had no idea that death would overtake him first." And after a while he added, "But Abdullah is even more cruel than the Mahdi." "And that has led to the present revolts and slaughter," answered the captain, "and the whole structure of government which the Mahdi erected is bound to fall sooner or later." "And what will happen then?" "England," answered the captain. During the rest of the journey, Staś told them about the trip to Fashoda, about the death of old Dina, their departure from Fashoda, their journey to uninhabited districts, and their search for Smain. When he came to the part where he had killed the lion, and then Geber and Camus and the two Bedouins, the captain interrupted him, exclaiming, "All right!" and once more grasping his right hand. He and Clary continued to listen with increasing interest about the taming of King, their dwelling in Krakow, Nell's fever, the finding of Linda, and the kites which the children sent up from the Karamayo Mountains. The doctor, who grew fonder of little Nell day by day, was so especially interested in all that had threatened to harm her that from time to time he had to strengthen himself with a drop of brandy, and when Staś began to relate how she had nearly become the prey of the terrible Wobo, he took the little girl in his arms and would not let her go for some time, as if afraid that some new beast of prey might threaten her life. What he and the captain thought of Staś was expressed in 2 telegrams, which they sent off 2 weeks later, after they had reached the foot of Kilimanjaro, by messengers, who had orders to forward as soon as possible to the 2 fathers. The first telegram was carefully worded and sent to Port Said. It was as follows: "Thanks to the boy, have good news of the children, come to Mombasa." The second was more explicit and addressed to Aden. It read, "The children are safe in our hands, the boy a hero." They made a halt of 2 weeks on the cool summits of Kilimanjaro, for Dr. Clary urged this on account of the health of Nell and of Staś. The children adored this sky-high mountain, which possessed every kind of climate imaginable. Its 2 peaks, Kibo and Moenzi, were usually clothed in thick mists during the day, but when the mists suddenly lifted on clear evenings, the everlasting snows on the summit of Moenzi shone with a rosy glow, reflected from the sunset, while all the rest of the world was already wrapped in darkness. The mountain resembled a shining altar of God. At this sight, the children unconsciously folded their hands in prayer. For Staś, the days of worry, anxiety, and trouble were over. They now had a journey of a month before reaching Mombasa, and the road lay through the beautiful but unhealthy Towet forest. How much easier was it now to travel over well-known roads with a numerous and well-equipped caravan than to wander around in an unknown wilderness accompanied by Kali and Mia. Besides, Captain Glenn now took charge of the journey. Staś recovered and went hunting. Having found a chisel and hammer among the tools of the caravan, he set to work during the cool hours to chisel on a large gneiss rock the following inscription: "Poland is not lost yet," for he wished to leave at least a trace of their sojourn in this country. The Englishmen, to whom he translated the inscription, were surprised that the boy had not thought of perpetuating his own name by carving it on a rock in Africa. But he preferred the sentiments he had chiseled on it. He continued to protect Nell, and this gave her such an unlimited confidence in him that when Dr. Clary asked her whether she was not afraid of the storms on the Red Sea, the girl rested her beautiful soft eyes on him and replied, "Staś will know what to do." Captain Glenn said that no one could have given a truer and more beautiful proof of what Staś was to the little one, or given him higher praise. Although the first telegram sent to Mr. Tarkowski at Port Said was very carefully worded, it produced such a great effect on Nell's father that he nearly died of joy, and Mr. Tarkowski, although an unusually demonstrative man, knelt down to pray and besought God that this news might not be another false clue or the result of a diseased imagination brought about by their own longing and their grief. For had they not both done everything trying to ascertain if their children were still alive? Mr. Rawlison had led caravans to the Sudan, and Mr. Tarkowski, dressed as an Arab, had gone as far as Khartoum, thereby greatly endangering his life. Nothing had been of any avail. Those who might have given them some news had died from smallpox or from hunger, or had been killed in the bloody fights that were continually being waged, and there seemed no more trace of the children than if they had fallen into the water and disappeared. At last both fathers gave up all hope and only lived on remembrances, firmly convinced that there was nothing in life for them, and that death alone would reunite them to their loved ones, who were everything to them. When this great joy suddenly came to them, it was almost more than they could bear. Nevertheless, it was accompanied by uncertainty and surprise. Neither of them could comprehend how and in what manner the news of the children had come from this part of Africa, that is to say, from Mombasa. Mr. Tarkowski imagined that an Arab caravan, advancing from the eastern coast after having been in the interior hunting for ivory, had reached the Nile and had either bought their freedom or had stolen them. The words of the telegram, "Thanks to the boy," they accounted for in the following manner. They conjectured that Stash must have written to the captain and the doctor and told them where he and Nell were to be found. But there were many things which it was impossible to explain. On the other hand, Mr. Tarkowski clearly saw that this was not only good news, but very good news, for otherwise the captain and the doctor would not have dared to arouse their hopes, and besides, they would not have told them to come to Mombasa. The preparations for the journey were soon made, and on the second day after receiving the telegrams, both engineers, with Nell's governess, boarded a large steamer of the Peninsula and Orient Company, which was on its way to India, and stopped en route at Aden, Mombasa, and Zanzibar. In Aden a second telegram awaited them, which read, "The children are safe in our care. The boy a hero." After he had read it, Mr. Rawlison, nearly beside himself, continually repeated as he grasped Mr. Tarkowski's hand, "You see, he saved her. I owe her life to him." And Mr. Tarkowski repressed his feelings so as not to appear weak, compressed his lips, and answered, "Yes, the boy has been brave," and entering his cabin he wept for joy. At last the moment came when the children threw themselves into the arms of their fathers. Mr. Rawlison took his regained treasure in his arms, and Mr. Tarkowski held his heroic boy pressed to his heart in a long embrace. Their calamities had passed by as hurricanes and storms pass over the desert. Life was once more filled with sunlight and happiness, their longing and separation even increasing their present rejoicing. But the children were greatly surprised that their father's hair had become quite white during the separation. They returned to Suez on a French boat of the Messageries Maritimes, which was crowded with passengers from the islands of Réunion, Mauritius, and from Madagascar and Zanzibar. When the news that there were children on board who had been taken captive by the dervishes and escaped had become known, Stash was made the center of general curiosity and admiration. But the happy quartet preferred to shut themselves up in the large cabin, which the captain had given up to them, and pass the cool hours relating their adventures. Nell also took part, chattering like a little bird, and to the great amusement of everybody, she commenced every sentence with "and." Resting on her father's knees and raising her lovely eyes to him, she talked somewhat like this: "And, Papa dear!" And they carried us off, and led us on camels, and Geber beat me, and Stash protected me, and we arrived in Khartoum, and there people died of hunger, and Stash worked so as to get dates for me, and we were with the Mahdi, and Stash would not change his religion, and the Mahdi sent us to Fashoda, and then Stash killed a lion and all, and we lived in a large tree called Krakow, and King was with us, and I had the fever, and Stash cured me, and he killed a wobo and conquered the Sambarus, and, Papa dear, he was always very good to me. She also spoke of Kali, Mia, King Saba, Lindi, and his mountain, and of the kite sent up just previous to meeting the captain and the doctor. Mr. Rawlison could with difficulty suppress his tears during this chatter, pressed his child more closely to his heart, and Mr. Tarkowski was so overcome with pride that he could not control himself. For even from this childish talk, it could readily be seen that had it not been for the ability and energy of the boy, the little one would have been hopelessly lost, not only once, but many times. Stash gave an exact account of everything, and while telling of the journey from Fashoda to the waterfall, a great load fell from his chest, for when he told how he had shot Geber and his followers, he stopped and looked uneasily at his father, but Mr. Tarkowski frowned, thought a while, and then said gravely, "Listen, Stash, one ought never kill anyone, but if anyone threaten your country, or the life of your mother or sister, or the life of a woman placed in your care, then unquestionably shoot him, and without any qualms of conscience, and never feel any remorse." On arriving at Port Said, Mr. Rawlison and Nell went to England, where they took up their residence. Stash's father sent him to a school in Alexandria, for there his deeds and adventures were not so well known. The children wrote to each other almost every day, but it so happened that they did not see each other for 10 years. After the boy had completed his studies in Egypt, he attended the Polytechnic School in Zurich, and on receiving his diploma engaged in tunnel work in Switzerland. It was 10 years later, when Mr. Tarkowski retired, that they both visited their friends in England. Mr. Rawlison invited them to spend the entire summer at his house near Hampton Court. Nell had passed her 18th birthday and had grown up a lovely girl, blooming like a rose. And Stash found, at the cost of his peace of mind, that a man of 24 is not too young to think of the ladies. In fact, he thought so continually of the beautiful and well-beloved Nell that he felt like running off wherever his eyes would lead him and his feet would carry him. But one day Mr. Rawlison, laying both his hands on the young man's shoulders, looked into his eyes and said, "Stash, tell me, is there anyone in the world but you to whom I could trust her so well?" The young Tarkowski couple remained in England till the death of Mr. Rawlison. A year later they started on a long journey. They had promised themselves the pleasure of revisiting the places where they had spent their childhood and had wandered as youngsters, so they first went to Egypt. The kingdom of the Mahdi and Abdullah had long since disintegrated, and after its ruin there came, as Captain Glenn had said, England. A railroad had been built from Cairo to Khartoum. The places which used to be overflowed by the Nile had been cleaned up, so that the young couple were able to travel in a comfortable steamer not only as far as Fashoda, but even to the large Victoria Nyanza Lake. From the town of Florence, which lay on the banks of this lake, they took the train to Mombasa. Captain Glenn and Dr. Clary had moved to Natal, but under the good care of the English officials in Mombasa lived King. The giant immediately recognized his former masters, and he welcomed Nell with such joyous trumpeting that the neighboring mangrove trees shook as though before a wind. He also knew old Saba, who had lived to almost twice the age allotted to dogs, and though half blind now, accompanied Stash and Nell wherever they went. Stash also learned while there that Kali was doing well, that he ruled under English protection over the whole territory south of Rudolph Lake, and that he had invited missionaries to come into his land to preach Christianity among the savage natives. After completing this final long journey, the young couple returned to Europe, and taking Stash's father with them, they made their permanent residence in Poland. If you like this content, check out my other audiobooks on the channel.
Remember to subscribe.